Okay, I guess it's 3 past the hour, so let's get started here. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So we're just going to go through the product updates that we've had for this week. Okay, so just starting with some very basic things, right? So one of the things that we get a lot of requests on, etc., is because this particular script over here basically generates uh, uh, an ID which basically is valid for 10 minutes, and then you're not able to use it beyond 10 minutes because that's how it is. So we've kind of replaced this code so that essentially it dynamically generates the code each time. And so you don't need to essentially kind of copy and paste this repeatedly. So now this is available in your instances, and you can essentially copy and paste this, and this will work 100% of the time. So this should solve a lot of the, this also can be used along with your RMM installation. So it solves a lot of the issues that you have with RMM installations, as well as basically normal installations where the AWS timeout for the S3 basically would kick in. So this is basically one of the changes that we made this week. This is available for all the platforms. So you can essentially see the curl requests, etc., which are also being modified so that this can happen. So this should take care of the deployment issues that we've been having recently. Second is that a lot of you basically wanted to be able to add network device credentials, and now we have the ability to add network device credentials. That essentially has also been incorporated right now. And this basically, you can also update the credentials. So for example, if you essentially get into an asset, you can basically then update the credentials for it as a network asset. So this is in there. Third request, which essentially came to us from a lot of people, was that we send out reports which are valid for 7 days. So if you're on vacation or something like that, and you've not been able to download that report, then those links are invalid. So you want to be able to basically kind of be able to download those reports. So now we have the ability for you to essentially go back, because now we have standard reports, which basically in the jobs, you can essentially go and download the reports from there. So all of the historical reports that have been generated are available for you. So this is another feature. It will be very useful even if you want to essentially kind of do download the reports for the previous month and compare it to the current month. You can essentially do this going forward. So we have the complete history of all the reports that you've basically created and scheduled. Okay, so now coming on to one of the features that was essentially we had talked about, we basically released the PII scan in beta. So what I'm going to do right now is to basically kind of walk you through a video which essentially shows you how you can use the PII scan in your systems that has been released. So first, basically you create a PII scan profile. So essentially I'm just creating one PII scan profile, and then I can choose what is the data store. So there are two data stores. One is a global and one is basically a company specific. In the global data store, I can essentially add multiple companies and basically do all of that pieces for a file. But it won't work for a database because database has to be done on a per company basis. So once I basically create my profile, I can essentially go to a company, I can run the PII scan, and then I can basically view all the results in the PII scan results. So it basically talks about what's the asset. It will tell you what kind of PII data it found, whether it's credit card, email, all of that stuff. And when you click on the number of occurrences, and when you click on that particular number, it will essentially show you which line number has this particular data. Now, basically what we're going to do here is that we have this file. So we're just going to basically go to this particular file, which is in there, which basically contains credit card information. And now, say, for example, you go and basically kind of, here is a simple thing, we are deleting the file. So if you didn't delete the file and the file goes away, then what happens is basically in a subsequent scan, which I'll basically show you shortly, like when you go into so I'll just move to the next slide and then you can see what happens. So just a second. So when you subsequently basically look at it and then we schedule a scan, and then you can see that the scan has been initiated. You can basically look at it in the jobs. And then when you look at the PI scan results, it essentially shows this particular item as basically remediated. So essentially it keeps live track of all the things that basically it found. And if that is resolved, then it will essentially mark that as remediated. So this basically is available for all of you in your instances right now. Please remember, this is a beta release. And so there might be a little bit of quirks here and there, and we are basically request you to basically send us feedback so that we can essentially fix those pieces. But so just walking through, you can essentially create your PI scan profile. You can basically add databases. You can add files, all of these pieces out here. And then once you create those profiles, then we have basically support for all the, we have support for all the databases, Elasticsearch, MariaDB, MongoDB, MySQL, OpenSearch. So you can essentially kind of look for all data and across all the databases. And when you choose a particular database, it will essentially ask you for credentials of that database. Or you can basically do it on file. So here is an example for MongoDB, and you can essentially kind of choose which agent you're going to basically run this test from. So basically it shows you the list of agents, and you can basically run this particular database test from that particular agent. And then once basically you get a result, you can essentially see the result over here, and you can see which line number, and basically if it's a database, which record basically had this particular data. And then, as I explained, you can essentially see what is what type of data was found, where was it found, and what are the line numbers in which basically it was found. And then basically we have all the PIs can basically appear as jobs. So you can essentially look at the job status that you're used to at this particular point of time. And you can basically schedule these scans. Again, you can essentially kind of choose PI scans, select which companies, and basically you want to run it either daily or weekly. And we basically would suggest that these are intensive scans. So typically, basically, you should schedule it over the weekend or sometime when basically people are offline. And then all of this data basically comes into PI scan result reports. So you have two reports. One is a Word and one is an Excel report, which you can download. So this is essentially an example of the report. So this basically talks about what is the status, what is the asset type, all of the details that you basically saw in that report will basically appear here. And the same thing with like a Word report. So you can essentially see all of the details in Word. So you can see the data. So this basically can be used this thing. The second thing essentially is that we now, when we basically, so that was essentially as far as PI is concerned. So this basically is this is available as a beta right now. So you can essentially see over here that it basically calls out, basically it's a beta. So please send your feedback in. We will basically be keeping this in beta for 3 to 4 weeks, post which essentially we'll move it into production. And we'll try to incorporate all the feedback that you give us in the next 3 to 4 weeks into this particular product. So that's essentially what we have. The next one is that.
No, just 1 second.
Yeah.
There are a few questions. I thought we could just.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Quick question is PI available for the on-premise version?
On-premise version, we will be pushing it on Friday.
Okay, and for the SaaS version, there are some people saying that when will it be added? They're not seeing it yet.
It's already pushed. If they basically kind of refresh their screen, or go into an incognito mode, they should be able to see these new menus, or log out and log in again.
Okay, and one last question before we clear this is, should everyone have the option for PIS beta scans?
Yes, everybody has the option for PI beta scans. It's an open beta.
Okay, so it's an open beta. So just to kind of bring it out there, this will at some point be, there'll be an additional price module. Price won't be a significant charge. That has not ever been the philosophy of CyberCNS. But for now, it's available in beta. Please use it. And in the meantime, in about a week, 10 days time, we'll come back with the commercial aspect of it in a subsequent call. Yeah, go ahead, Shiva. Thank you.
Yep. And one of the things that basically we earlier had the setup for Microsoft to integrate with Microsoft Office 365, but a lot of you have requested for a SAML-based integration with Azure. So we basically have done the SAML-based integration, and now it's available as an authentication provider. So there is basically a sequence of steps that's documented in the documentation, which talks about how to set it up. You basically have to give us a configuration endpoint. And once you basically provide the configuration endpoint, so that will essentially be configured, and then you can essentially use Azure SAML authentication in addition to any of the other mechanisms that we have. The second thing which we've done here is that for all of the remediations, we now basically have added what software was installed and what version was installed, plus when it was installed, so that you can essentially have a trail of what basically caused, what remediated a particular set of vulnerabilities, or basically a remediation plan. Third, one of the questions that came up because of SFTP and some people not being able to open SFTP folders, etc., the ability to be able to deliver reports to an Azure Blob storage, this has been added, and you can essentially kind of see this here. You can basically, all you need to do is to enter the Azure connection string, and all of the reports that are generated will automatically be pushed into this Azure Blob storage. So you can essentially pick up all of your reports from the Azure Blob storage. This was basically a request from Andrew Watasco. We basically earlier had the option of, you could kind of, when you manage company mapping, you could either add a company mapping, and if you wanted to change it, you had to delete it and re-add it. Now we basically have the ability to update the company mapping also. This was basically not done initially itself, because when you change company mappings, there are a whole bunch of actions that need to be performed. So at that point of time, that was not completed, but now we've been able to complete all those actions. So now basically you can essentially see, you can change the company mapping at a subsequent point of time. So this is also basically done. Last but not the least, basically the agent 2.0.86 basically has been released today. It basically has the ability to do the PII scans. Second is that we basically had switched off the AD audit capability for a probe, and that basically kind of came and bit us, because if somebody installed a probe on a DC, and then what happened is that the AD audit data was not going back from the DC, and for that you needed the lightweight agent, which basically you cannot install both the lightweight agent and probe on a single machine. So right now your probe, if it is installed on a DC or primary or secondary, it will essentially pull out the event logs and basically add the AD audit capability with this particular release. There were basically a couple of issues with agent hanging in case basically you had very large subnets, so that has been resolved. There are basically the TPM version was not correctly being fetched for Windows 11 compatibility in a few cases, so that has also been fixed in this pieces. And then for AD GPO data, there was essentially some issues with the AD scan, which was essentially resolved in this agent. Last but not the least, the most important thing, which is for all on-prem people. See, one of the things that we noticed is like in the last update, we essentially had to update OS query, because OS query basically we needed to move to version 5. And when we basically moved OS query, it basically is almost like a 30-35 MB download that essentially happens. Now, when people have a large number of machines, which basically are lightweight agents, all of them essentially start pulling the updates. And these updates are being pulled from the hosted server that you folks are hosting on-prem. And that basically caused kind of a little bit of a lot of traffic, because if you imagine 27 MB into say 1,000 machines is basically a huge amount of data, and that essentially was causing almost like a traffic storm. So what we've done right now is that in case you can essentially reach our central Amazon S3 repository from the agent, it will download from there, so that the load of the download does not come into your server. And if it is not available, then it will go back to your server. So this essentially has been released, and this is made available as of today. So this basically is a change that we've completed today. And pretty much this is essentially kind of what we've been working this week. So primary things, PII scan, lot of a new agent, which basically provides a lot of hardening and more fixes. Plus, basically, as I said, AD audit in the probe agent. And other thing is basically the delivery of reports to Azure Blob storage. So I think a lot of you can basically use this. It will ease your life. And basically Azure SAML authentication in case anybody wants to use Azure SAML authentication. So all of this essentially are now delivered in your instances. But all of your on-prem instances basically have been updated, but there are a few instances that are not reachable. We've reached out to you. In case you basically want to get your instance updated and it's not yet updated, please reach out through support and basically provide us with access through one of our central servers. And basically we will essentially update your instance and make it ready. This process will become easier as we go forward, because instead of a salt minion, we are basically writing an agent which will essentially sit on your server and then basically do a pull instead of basically a salt minion, which is more of a push. So this is being worked on, but basically by the end of this month, that will also be delivered. So these are essentially the updates for this week.
Right. Thank you, Shiva. Just a few quick to catch up on chat. One question is, there seems to be inconsistency in the UI on the on-premises version as opposed to what people are seeing on the screenshot that you're sharing, which is the SaaS version. So that's one question. And others that people have also kind of gone into incognito mode and refreshed cache and all that, but still can't see the PII feature. So just want to kind of quickly speak to that, and then we can go on to the next questions.
Yep. So basically, please give me what is your domain name. Basically, we'll have a check around that. I will basically look at it as to why you're not able to see it. But very likely, basically, it might be right now the permissions are getting updated. So the way that it works is any new feature, when it gets rolled out, we essentially have all the roles which get updated with the new features, because everything is basically a particular role, right? So it might just be that your roles are getting updated in your instance. So the moment the roles get updated, you will essentially see them appear. Typically, it takes around like anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour for it to complete all the tenants. So you should see it in the next hour or two. You should basically see those menus appear for you. Srikanth, anything else that?
After that, it's a question. Adam has I think a feature request. Can we add a source IP filter for the CyberCNS application access? Agent communication still needs to happen, so we don't want to block it at the firewall.
Okay, so this. So source IP of which one?
Adam, please can you come up and request you to explain it better, please?
Yes, if we could just put an IP filter in so that we can restrict application access based on the end user's IP. So if we want to limit it to one location to be able to access the application, but still allow agent communication to happen, so it would only be limited to the actual web application portion.
Yes, Adam, we can do that. That should be. So this is basically, you're talking about on-prem or hosted?
Yes.
No, is it on-prem or hosted?
Sorry, it's on-prem.
Yeah, on-prem would not be a problem. In the hosted, basically, we have to basically do a little bit more of work, but on-prem, we can essentially do this. So the basic thing is that the web app should be accessible only from a certain set of IPs, but agent communication should happen from anywhere that's installed, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, that we will take that as a request and basically implement that.
Next question is
Thank
from
you.
Paul. Hey, hi, Paul. Sonic wall integration. Is it possible to have the target set by selecting a lightweight agent or probe's current public IP? used for DHCP firewalls being scanned by the public probe. And second, create a global sorting baseline query. So example, show me all firewalls with disabled gateway antivirus on LAN zone. Paul, again, would you like to come on explain better, please?
Sure. So the first point being, if doing the firewall integration with SonicWall, and it probably applies to others, dealing with some smaller branch offices, smaller clients that don't have a static IP on their firewall, have DHCP. Thought it'd be great if an installed lightweight agent or installed probe can determine what its public IP address and really have a value or a placeholder in the SonicWall integration, so that that is the IP that it's scanning, which obviously could change via DHCP. We thought about doing it via dynamic DNS and handling that. That's just another set of things to manage, and didn't know if we could set the target based on a generated IP that the probe or the lightweight agent could, determine and update occasionally.
Paul, I think we can do this. So because the point is that what we've done is that we've done the following. We've essentially, with the PII scan, we now have the ability from the lightweight agent to basically connect to other systems. So it will be possible for us to essentially provide you with a lightweight agent that basically just has the firewall scan. So we basically can extend what we've done with the PII scan to essentially provide this feature. So let me take this in, and I will basically get back to you on how we can implement it. And if it's okay, basically, if you will be okay to be our beta tester, we'll be happy to basically send you a version that you can just beta test.
Okay, great. And then the second question had to do with, essentially the ability to, from a global perspective, audit the firewall integrations, and whether it's almost analogous to a baseline of a software baseline, or being able to do ad hoc queries and find out where configurations vary from baselines, or being able to do queries against it. I'm not sure how you're gathering essentially the firewall report, but the ability to query against it globally to find out what's out of spec from what baselines are, standards are, would be really nice.
So what would be the baseline items, Paul, in that particular case? Would it essentially be the network rules alone, or would it also be basically users or any of those other pieces too?
It could be a lot of things. I'm sure every MSP, every manager would have a slightly different one. So, we're a SonicWall shop and have hundreds of SonicWalls that we manage, and finding, is an example would be SSH management open to the world versus locked down to our data center. And security hole, if someone were to have turned on SSH external management and didn't limit the access list to our data center, obviously a problem. Or if something like a security service didn't have the right exclusion applied to it. Things like that, that it could be kind of ad hoc things, but a bunch of those things, we have a standard in knowing what varies from the standard, as well as just ad hoc queries to find out, if I wanted to look at every firewall that has DHCP enabled on the WAN interface, things like that.
Understood. So the ability to essentially create a bunch of ad hoc queries and then basically make them a baseline standard that we measure against, correct? That's what we essentially need for all the firewalls, correct? But and that could hold for both firewalls and network devices too, right? Because you may need this for other network devices also.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Paul, this basically probably is something that probably will take around 4 to 6 weeks, but I will essentially circle back with you with some ideas on how we would implement it, and I can bring it to the team next week. And then if everybody thinks that this is a good idea, then we can essentially kind of implement that. But I can see where you're coming and how it can be valuable. So I'm going to basically start working on that.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, so thank you, Paul. Moving on, Mark has a suggestion that is there an option to not display the PII capability because some clients may not want to provide it.
Okay, I'll basically give a global option where basically we can enable and disable the PII. So we'll give us a day or two and we'll basically have it there.
All right, so Mark, I hope that addresses your question.
Yes,
Chris,
it does. Thank you.
thank you, Mark. Onshore, for the network devices credentials, will there be a detailed documentation on what type and brand of devices are supported and what protocols are being used to access those devices?
I'm working on documenting it along with the team. So this documentation will be available next week on Monday or worst case Tuesday.
Okay. Simon has a question. Can the lightweight agent be deployed?
You have a
from the
ticket
code?
also on this. This is how it works today also, which is like when you basically, when we basically say connect to a Windows machine, we basically install the lightweight agent over there, and then we do not uninstall it. We basically then the probe does not run further on it. It essentially only if the version changes, then the lightweight agent upgrades itself. But beyond that, it does not essentially, it leaves the lightweight agent installed on the machine that is installed. So this is already there. So the dissolvable agent goes in there, it installs it, and then there is an option. So if you leave it installed, it will basically keep it installed. I'll create a video, Simon, and basically send it out to you. So you can essentially see how exactly this works.
Yeah, that'll be great, Shiva. I think from my experience, and I might have this wrong, it might be a problem in my instance, is that when we install the probe and we set up the scheduled scans and it goes off and does a discovery across the network, it absolutely does pick up the assets. But within the Cyber CNS portal on the specific asset, it doesn't seem to show that the lightweight agent is installed, or it's been discovered through a scheduled scan. I mean, I'll now that you've said that, I'll go and double check that. But my understanding was that when it ran the scheduled scan, the dissolvable agent then disappeared or ran and then was uninstalled. But I'll check over that.
Yeah, I'll basically create this and do it.
And just whilst I've got you, Shiva, just because I'd asked a question a little bit earlier in the email thread, just about the UI, and perhaps sort of my experience is that a couple of the screen grab sort of pages that you've shown, in particular the asset security, where there's more graphical options now, that doesn't appear on my on-premise. I did log a ticket with the team, I think last week or early in the week, and provided SSH access and an example of where it was different. And the guys investigated, they updated the portal, the graphical options didn't appear, and then when I queried it with the team, they came back and sort of suggested that the on-prem was that particular features or that UI wasn't on the roadmap, or it was out of kilter or out of step with sort of the SaaS-based version, and there was no plans to update that. I can share the ticket number if you want to read through that. I didn't know if that is the case, or maybe there was a misunderstanding there.
So Simon, my request is just share the ticket number. The concept is that we want to keep parity between on-prem and basically on the SaaS version. There should be no difference on it. If there is basically some deviation, then I will essentially get that resolved for you. The only deviation that will happen is essentially on the external scan. And one of the things that we are, which I think I wanted to ask, because this was a debate between the engineering team and me. So for the external scan, is it okay that we essentially kind of, from your on-prem, essentially send requests to the central server to run the external scans? Because I don't think it basically makes sense for us to run external scans from your host over there, because it requires a lot of horsepower in order to basically run all those queries. So that's the only thing. You will listen, it will run it remotely and then bring back the results and show it in the same user interface. But just that it is basically going to delegate it to the cloud only for the external scans. Would that be a deal breaker, or is that something that we can work with?
I mean, I'll speak for myself. I don't have a problem for that. Certainly, there's not a problem for me on that. I don't know what the group think, but what you're describing does make sense.
Perfect. Adam, what about you? Are you okay with us basically using it as an external proxy?
Provided the IP address of that external scan would be fairly static, then I don't see a problem with it.
It'll be a static IP, a documented IP.
Yeah, should be okay then.
So Dennis, that is true. It is basically a selectable option. So I'll actually send a video out to everyone showing how it is. So you can choose whether basically it has to be installed as a lightweight agent or it basically is to be used as a dissolvable agent. So I will basically send that video out shortly.
All caught up for now. Any questions?
Perfect. So folks, I will basically send out a message on Slack as soon as the roles update is completed. And please basically use the new feature, give us your feedback. We would like to make it one of the best features that are out there. And we would also basically like you to basically give us more feedback in terms of what else we can add into this particular piece. Just from a roadmap perspective, the way we are looking at it is that, and tell us if this is okay. What we said is that right now we're just telling you that, okay, this file, this particular thing is located, right? Now, how do we basically remediate this for the customer? So giving you options saying that, do you want to basically encrypt the file? In which case, since it's a lightweight agent, it basically will encrypt the file, or you want to essentially move the data into a vault, which could be a vault that you have, which could be basically like, say you have some password vault or whatever it is. And the second thing could be that you could host your own vault and we could basically help you with that. And then we move all the data into that particular vault for the customer. So you're hosting the vault for the customer. So that's basically the second part. So how do you essentially go from, yeah, you have all this data, which is basically open, fine. And then the customer naturally is going to say, if I have to do all of this work, then it's a lot of work for me. How do you automate that entire process is what we're looking at from our perspective. And I would like to hear, I would like to get feedback from you saying that, is that the right way to do it? What are the limitations and liabilities that you would essentially see in this entire scene? I'm just throwing it out so that you essentially kind of think about what is the process next, like, because first is PII scans, we got the PII, but after that, what's next, right? So what do you feel about basically moving into the remediation realm? Because we want to keep moving into the remediation realm for everything that we do, because that's how essentially we can get economies of scale. Because as you get to more and more customers, once you remediate automatically, that's when basically you get economies. Otherwise, we are just going to basically keep doing these things manually, and then it basically does not scale very well. Anybody has any opinions on it? Or if you want to basically send it to us on email or whatever it is, it's fine. Dennis, if you can come on, any chance?
Yes, Shiva. I think, yeah, I like the idea of auto remediation for third-party applications. Pretty cautious about it when it comes to operating system updates.
No, not just operating system. I'm saying, for example, we find PII data, right? So for example, we find credit card data in a file. Now, the point is that how does basically a customer secure this data now? The point is that should we essentially take the step of automating it and basically, for example, taking it and basically putting it into his account, say, for example, in a LastPass or whatever it is, so that it is secured, and basically remove the data from the original file. If we essentially did that, then it would essentially then become an auto remediation process that would take place, correct?
Wow, that sounds interesting. I have to think about that. Sounds like it's like a lot of additional complexity to do that, just because it would be so many different options for what people would want to do with that data.
I agree. And that's where I want basically any thought process that anybody may have in terms of what we can do better, because the point is that I am a PII scanner, everybody else is a PII scanner. Now I can give you reports and that's not the end of it, right? How do we go from that to essentially getting it to remediated and basically adding value to the customer, in which case he's willing to pay an MSP or MSSP extra because they just automate the entire process.
I think that requires some thought in terms of is if it's practically doable. I mean, if you have a workflow for how it would work to look at, that would be a good way to think about it.
Yep, I can basically bring up a workflow and probably a sample like demo of the whole piece, probably in a week or couple of weeks, and then we can essentially all look at it and decide how we want to take this.
That sounds good.
Perfect. Perfect. So thanks everyone for basically coming over onto this call, and we will basically see you next week. Please keep the feedback coming, and we basically will keep these updates flowing to you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of it. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for your time.